Hey, it's Flyover Country with Scott Jennings. Glad to be with you, and thank you so much. We're grateful for everybody who's listening to the show, and we're getting a growing following out there, and we are getting some really impressive people to join us on the show. I'm actually surprised every time somebody reaches out to us or says yes to us. I'm always stunned at the people who want to come on the show, and I was really surprised when today's guest said yes so readily. His name, he's not from the world of politics. We've done a lot of politics on the show, but this is from the world of medicine. His name is Dr. Jason Fung, and he is the author of a book called The Obesity Code. He's also written other books, The Diabetes Code, The Complete Guide to Fasting. I found Dr. Fung a little over a year ago when I was searching for something in my life to help me solve my health situation. I knew my health care was off the rails. I was on the roller coaster that a lot of people are on with weight. Goes up, goes down, try gimmicks. It works for a while. You put it back on. And I just was looking for something to get me off the roller coaster that would work, that was sustainable, and it wasn't a gimmick. And so I started reading about intermittent fasting. I'd heard about it, started reading about it. I found this guy's book, Dr. Fung's book, The Obesity Code. And when you look into what he has done, how he arrived at his theories, you look at his practice. He's a kidney doctor, and he was treating all these people that had all these symptoms, but he was never, in his mind, treating the root cause of a lot of their problems, obesity. And so he starts to think about how to get at the root cause, and it led him to this epiphany about the use of fasting to improve people's health. And we talk a lot about this today. If you were like me, and I mean, so many people are, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, I felt ashamed so many years. Like, am I not good enough? Am I not smart enough? Do I not have enough willpower? There's something wrong with me that I can't make something work? And what I have come to understand is, no, there's nothing wrong with any of you. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with Joe Arnold, who's with me today as we interview Dr. Fung, who's been on the same roller coaster that a lot of us have. There's nothing wrong with us. There is something wrong with our society and the way we treat food and the way we have normalized the ingestion of sugar and so on and so forth. But there's nothing inherently wrong with you. There are things to learn. And why I had Jason Fung on the show today is because I think if people learned about what he's talking about and learned about the fact that there's nothing wrong with fasting and there's a lot of right with it, that we've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years as humans, that it would cause a revolution, frankly, in the way we live, the way we eat, the way we think about our health. And so I wanted to do my part to get Dr. Fung's theories and methods out there because I think it could help people. It helped me. I think it could help us at a macro scale. We talked about public policy on the show this week and about how more governments should think about more comprehensively tackling, these issues. I mean, we have massive healthcare problems in our society because of what we're eating and how we're eating it and when we're eating, and we're treating the symptoms. We spend a ton of money on treating people's symptoms of being obese and having diabetes and so on and so forth, but we're just not getting at the root causes. And that's where Dr. Fung is. And that's why I wanted to have him on. He was a fascinating interview. His books are great. You can find him on the internet, www.drjasonfung.com, all spelled out. He's the founder of something called thefastingmethod.com. He's all over, the internet. He's been on TV. He's quoted in articles. He's got some acolytes who work for him, Megan Ramos and others that are around doing their own podcasts and things. But this is the granddaddy. This is the guru. This is the guy. If you want to get into intermittent fasting and you want to learn about it and you want to hear from somebody who I think approaches it with an open heart, who truly wants to make this world better, who wants to make your healthcare better, and who wants to give you the information to unlock better outcomes, this is your guy. You're on Flyover Country. I'm Scott Jennings, and we're glad to have you here to listen to our interview with Dr. Jason Fung.
Attention passengers, we ask that you please fasten your seatbelts at this time and secure all baggage underneath your seat or in the overhead compartments. Flyover Country with Scott Jennings is prepared for takeoff.
All right. Thanks for joining us on the Flyover Country podcast. I'm Scott Jennings. Appreciate your engagement with the show. We have a very, very special show this week. As you heard at the top, Dr. Jason Fung is our special guest, and along for the ride this week, my co-pilot and the host of our weekly roundtable discussions, Joe Arnold, is here. Joe, thanks for being with us today, brother.
I'm excited, and Dr. Fung, it's a real pleasure and an honor to talk to you. Scott has introduced you to many people around our listening area here.
So we're glad to have you, Dr. Fung, and Joe is exactly right. About a year ago, I found you and found your book and introduced it to Joe, and he and I for several months kind of engaged in it together. I've had a little bit different experience than him lately, and it's something we want to talk about today. But we're so honored to have you, and I'd just like to frankly start with your story, which I find interesting, because I think it's applicable to a great many things in our society where we end up treating symptoms of things, but we don't ever ask ourselves, what are the root causes of things? And you could apply this to many of our problems in society, but you have applied that directly to your clinical work. And so I thought we'd start there. Tell us how you got started and how you found intermittent fasting to be the answer to some of the questions you were asking yourself every day.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. So I'm a kidney specialist. So I trained at the University of Toronto and then at UCLA. And I started off very sort of conventionally, just treating people, the same way, dialysis, medications, that kind of thing. But after a few years, it became obvious that what we were doing was not working. That is, there's more and more obesity, more and more, which led to more and more type 2 diabetes, which led to more and more kidney disease. And that was sort of where things were by, the early 2010s, for example. And eventually it dawned on me that we were sort of looking at it all the wrong way. That is, if you look at type 2 diabetes, people were saying, oh, it's a chronic and progressive disease. But we knew in our heart that that actually wasn't true. We're sort of just lying to ourselves as physicians because we're having such a poor time trying to get people to lose weight. That is, everybody knew, like doctors knew it, patients knew it, everybody knew. If you lost weight, your type 2 diabetes would either get way better or go away entirely. That wasn't the secret. But if that was the case and this was a reversible disease, then that's what you need to do, try and reverse it. Instead, we were trying to pretend that it was this chronic, progressive disease. It was just that our treatments were so incredibly poor that we weren't able to get people better. But, as physicians, nobody wanted to face up to that fact. But if you don't face up to it, you can't solve the problem, right? You can't. First thing to do is you have to acknowledge the problem. So the problem was weight loss. People had to lose weight. And so I really got interested in the question of how to get people to lose weight. And of course, at the time, there was a lot of people, count your calories. That was basically the only thing that anybody ever said about weight loss. And again, it was one of these big lies that we as physicians tell ourselves because we have been failing so badly. If it was the answer, then why was nobody getting better? Like, we'd been giving this advice for 25 years and nobody was getting better. So then obviously it's either got to be bad advice or it's got to be, people can't follow it. But either way, if people can't follow it, it's still bad advice, right? You're not helping people by giving them advice that they don't follow. So that's where I started to look back at this whole idea of, is it really just about counting calories? Because it really wasn't. There was a whole lot more to it than that. We tried to break it down into things like, it's all just about calories, which means that, eating cookies and eating broccoli, if they're the same number of calories, are equally fattening. But that's garbage. Like, everybody knows that cookies are fattening, broccoli is not particularly fattening. So this idea that it's all about calories is just wrong. And even when you look at it from a physiological perspective, it's wrong. That is, if you put cookies in your mouth and you put broccoli in your mouth, your body responds completely differently. The hormones that it releases are completely different. So therefore, our response to it is completely different. When you put those calories in your mouth, your body can either burn it for energy, generate body heat, give you energy to go out walking or running or whatever, or it can store it as body fat. Which one it does is the body's choice, right? So it depends on the hormones, not depends on the calories. And the only implication of this sort of understanding is that some foods are more fattening than other foods, which is obviously just common sense, right? Your grandmother could have told you that. Like, it just wasn't logical. And yet this was what was being sort of pushed onto the public as this sort of scientific weight loss. So the whole thing was just wrong. And so then I started to think about it. And then so I started to think about the hormones involved. And then eventually I thought about fasting. And this is, remember, about 10 years ago. And so everybody sort of knew that fasting was really, really bad for you. Nobody should ever do it. It was horrible. You know, you would gain weight with fasting. But, you know, my advantage was that I really could understand the scientific literature and so on. So I went back and said, well, what's wrong with not eating for a period of time? So say you don't eat for 16 hours or 18 hours or 20 hours. What happens to the body? And why is it so bad? And the truth was that there wasn't anything wrong with it. And in fact, if you think about what our body does, when you eat, you store those calories, and you can store it as body fat, for example. When you don't eat, you're going to use those calories that you're taking out of body fat, because that's your storage form, right? Just like if you go to the grocery store and you buy a lot of food, you put some of it in the fridge. Then when you don't go to the grocery store, you can take it out of the fridge. It's okay. That's what you're supposed to do with it. And so that's what our body does. When you put those calories into your body fat, it's stored. So you can only take it out of storage if you don't eat. Because if you are eating, your body's trying to store it. You can't store it and burn it at the same time. So really the only thing you need to do is give your body enough time to sort of use those calories that you stored away. That is literally the exact reason that we have body fat. It's not there for looks. It's there for you to use as a source of stored food energy or calories. So you're using it for what it's for. It was actually completely normal, physiologic. And guess what? Humans have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. Because if you look at fasting, there's been so many religions, for example, that have it as part of their normal practice. So therefore, it's not something like that we just made up. It's something that people have been doing for thousands of years. So here we have a complete something that is completely free, completely accessible, very simple to understand, and people have been doing it for thousands of years, and therefore was known to be safe. I mean, obviously, if you're underweight, you can't do it. But if you're overweight, then it's a completely safe thing to do, because you're using the body fat for its precise purpose. But yet, if you think about the public health implications, it had the ability to completely reverse type 2 diabetes, which is a huge, probably the biggest risk factor, short of smoking, for heart disease, strokes, cancers, the biggest cause of blindness, the biggest cause of kidney disease, non-traumatic amputations, right? I mean, it was a crazy thing to think that we actually had the power to reverse this in our hands if we just simply applied that knowledge. So that's where I started to talk about fasting and, trying to really sort of take out some of the misunderstandings of what it is. People had a lot of misconceptions that had been built in over many years. And, I was trying to bring the science to say, look, this is what you think, but this is actually what happens. So, some of the myths were that you'd go into starvation mode, and that was not true, that you couldn't concentrate, and that wasn't true, and that you'd have no energy, and that wasn't true. So that was where I started to think about it. And then as I started to use it in practice, again, it was just ridiculous. Like, people were getting better so quickly. I had patients with type 2 diabetes, for example, on high doses of insulin. So really, very severe diabetes. We started them fasting, like a couple of them, and I wrote this up in an article, within a month, they had completely gotten off of their insulin. They had completely reversed their type 2 diabetes. And it's like, these were people I had treated for the last 10 years with type 2 diabetes, and I didn't know enough to actually make them better. So that, that's really where I was like, okay, we need to make sure people understand that, hey, this is a very important option for you. Like, not that you have to do it or not have to do it, but you can choose for yourself, right? But we have to give people the right information that they can make this choice for themselves. If they don't want to do it, then don't do it, right? I don't, that's not my job. My job is to bring you the options, tell you what you need to do, and it's up to you to do better, right? So that's where I started to write about it, and that's where the books came from. So the Obesity Code was talking about some of the science of weight loss, and the Complete Guide to Fasting was about that, and the Diabetes Code was about trying to reverse type 2 diabetes, which I think is actually one of the most important things that we should be doing to really get ourselves a lot healthier and prevent a lot of the heart disease and so on.
So, Scott, I know that I was going to say, if I could, I'm going to ask you, because you've already shared this on the podcast and in the columns. I think it'd be helpful for a baseline here for folks to know your story. And
sure. Well, about a year ago, I like you explain in your book, Dr. Fung, I had been for years a heavy guy back to when I was a kid, and I had gone through periods of trying to do things that they say you should do that would work. And it mostly revolves around calories in, calories out. I used to tell people all the time, I have to eat less and run further. And it just, you'd lose some weight, and then you'd gain some weight, and then you'd lose some weight, and then you'd gain some weight. And it really wasn't until I found your book that I actually achieved some success that has been a sustainable success over a period of time. And I wrote about it because, I look, living out here, and this podcast is for flyover country. Our audience is kind of middle America. And if you look at the mortality rates and the type 2 diabetes rates and just what's killing people out here, it all revolves around obesity. And my dad has type 2 diabetes. I grew up with people that suffer from this now. And I could feel myself heading down that same road, and really wanting to find something that worked better than what I had experienced in my life. And so when I found you and when I found your work, it was really a life-changing experience. And I wanted to lose weight. I had my eye on the long-term health outcomes. What I was surprised about after this whole thing was how many people still, even after my success, would walk up to me and say things like, "Oh, this is completely wrong. This is totally unhealthy. You need to stop right now. You look terrible." And these are people who I'm sure have been on the same roller coaster I've been on. And so you run into these saboteurs. I mean, there are saboteurs everywhere. Our society is a saboteur. People in your life, people people you barely know. It's really interesting. And I guess my question is, as you counsel people, how do you? To me, this is as much psychological as it is physical, because you have to choose to do it, as you said. But people, you live in the real world. You got to deal with a spouse. You have to deal with people you work with. You have to deal with your kids. You have to deal with the random people that you run into on a daily basis. And so, if I may, I'm curious about your work in the psychology of this to some degree. How do you counsel people to deal with that part? Because for me, and I don't know about you, Joe, but for me, that's been the hardest part. The personal interactions, the social pressures, the people who are convinced that you're killing yourself because you lost 60 pounds like I did. I was wondering if you might comment on that, because the number one thing I hear is how do I deal with the psychology of it?
Yeah, I think that's that's why getting the information out to people is really important, so that the people who try to steer you away from it, they're well-meaning. They think that they're telling you the right thing, but they don't understand that a lot of the science actually doesn't back them up. A lot of the people who used to say, "Oh, you have to eat all the time, right? Eat 6 times a day, eat 10 times a day to lose weight." It's like, how does that even make any sense? How are you going to lose weight by eating? It's actually not physiologically possible. Or people would say, well, if you fast, you're going to gain weight. It's like, how does that work? Because it actually doesn't. And getting the information out to people so people understand that, hey, look, there's actually a lot of science that has been established over sort of 20, 30 years of research, at least, and several thousand years of sort of history that say that this is actually a healthy thing. So fasting used to be considered an extremely healthy thing. It was something that you did for yourself to make yourself better. It was only in the last. So, people would talk about fasting like cleansing or purification or so on. So you're basically trying to let your body get rid of all the sort of excess sugar and excess fat. And it was understood that this is something that you do not because it's super fun, right? Nobody really enjoys it that much, but it's something to do to stay healthy. And people understood that up until about sort of 20, 30 years ago, when there was this whole movement to say, oh, well, you have to eat all the time. So one is getting the information out there. And then the other thing you touch upon is what's very, important, which is that it's not simply about knowing how to do it. It's actually setting yourself up for success. And there's a few things that is important. One of them is sort of the environment in which you live in, because there are certain environments that are going to make it easy for you and certain ones that are going to make it hard for you. So I give the example sometimes. So say you're in you work in the office and you're in a meeting and so on. 50 years ago in the 70s, a meeting was just a meeting. You sat there and you listened and that was it. Right now, somebody always orders a big plate of cookies or something like that. So now, for example, if you're bored and you have nothing to do, you weren't hungry, you were never going to eat cookies, but hey, it's sitting there in front of you. You know it's not good for you. You know you shouldn't be eating them, but you do anyway.
But every single person listening to this, and Joe and I both work in corporate settings, and every single person listening to this knows what you're saying is 100% accurate. You do not in these corporate settings,
I feel seen.
Yeah, I mean, there is a plate of something bad on every table. It's amazing. I mean, at any time of the day. I mean, 10:30 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon. It is, you were bombarded with it. It's totally true.
Well, if you go even at physicians' conferences, okay, so you'll get your breakfast in the morning, and then at 10:30 they'll roll out the granola bars and stuff. At 12 you have a full thing, full lunch, and then at 2:30 there's muffins and cookies, right? And then there's dinner afterwards if you go to it. And it's like, okay, well, again, it's the environment that is going to lead you down the wrong path. Because if somebody didn't roll out a whole thing of fruit and granola at 10:30, you wouldn't be eating it because you had breakfast, right? And to some extent, these are things that are under our control. It's not just about knowing, about physiology and fasting. It's to say, look, if I was a boss, I'd be like, okay, first thing I do is say, okay, meetings, there's no food. This is a meeting. It's work. There's no more plates of cookies at the plates, little cups of chocolate or whatever, because that's not fair to people who are trying to lose weight. There's no more birthday parties, in the office sort of thing, because nobody needs to eat that cake anymore, right? So these are things that you have to understand. So this environmental and systemic things that you have to try and say, okay, well, this is not a lack of willpower, because we always blame lack of willpower, but I don't think people have less willpower than they did sort of 50 years ago. You just didn't have the opportunity to do that. And again, looking at the environment. So for example, say you go to get yourself a coffee, and of course, if right next they're selling donuts and cookies and everything, right? So that again is an environmental cue. You go get yourself a coffee, all of a sudden you've wound up with the donuts. Look, you shouldn't have done that, but you couldn't resist because it was there. If it wasn't there, you wouldn't. So then you can say, okay, well, maybe I'm going to put a coffee machine in the office so that people don't have to go down there, right? It's these things that are going to be really important, because that's the secret to why in the 70s people just didn't have the same struggles that we do. Because if you look at the fast food industry, there's just a lot more. There's coffee shops in the lobby. There's, stuff everywhere. And if not, people bring it in because of this mistaken notion that you must eat. And it's ingrained in us, right? So I'll tell you that when my sons were in grade school and they'd go on a field trip or something, right? You'd get this note that came back. And every parent's seen this. Oh, please pack 2 snacks for your kids. I'm like, why? Are they not eating lunch? Am I not feeding them dinner? Why did they need to? Because when I grew up, I didn't. right? You had after school, you wanted a snack. Your mom said, no, you're going to ruin your dinner, right? You wanted a after dinner snack. She'd say, no, you should have ate more at dinner. Nowadays, you go to soccer and some parents think you need to feed them in between the halves of soccer. And it's like, why? I played, that when I was a kid. I had a great time. Nobody chased me around with some juice and cookies thinking that I needed that to play. Everybody was playing, no problem. Just let them play. Don't force your kids to have some snacks, right? And it's a sort of this crazy situation, and that's what I mean. It's important to really look at these environmental factors because they're a lot more pervasive than we really understand, and it's something that we can make a conscious decision about. And all of a sudden, hey, like no more cookies in the meetings. It's like, hey, that's a great way for everybody just to stay away from all that sugar and temptation.
Funny you should say that because I was thinking two things. One, this is Joe, by the way, for the podcast listeners. The environmental cues are absolutely you're spot on. And Scott is a stronger person than I am, and I'm just much more susceptible to just buying into them or having a hard time getting back on the train after like a vacation or something like that, where it's just easier to go through the drive-through. Everyone else is getting something, so I will too. But what I was thinking about too, as far as you mentioned your kids, every time there's standardized testing in the school, there's always the thing that comes out and says, eat a good breakfast. But I think about, and to your point before about like intuitively, like what's different about how you feel about eating this versus eating that, broccoli versus a cookie. I'll be honest with you. Most times when I eat a big breakfast, I feel sick. Most times when I feel like when I kind of indulge myself, I might like that taste for the time being, but I end up paying for it like with a little bit of an upset stomach for half the morning. And for some reason, I suspend that understanding of my own experience and tell my kids, no, eat more, because somehow I've come to believe. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually think that what you experience is complete. Like, I think a lot of people have that experience, but the problem, as you said, is that you get told so often that you must eat breakfast. You have to eat a big breakfast. So then you do because you want to try and be healthy, right? But the truth is that your body is way smarter than we give it credit for, right? If you don't eat breakfast, you'll simply take the calories you need from storage, which is your body fat. I mean, most people, a lot of people are simply not hungry at breakfast time. And it's not because of anything wrong with them. It's because in the morning at around 5 a.m., there's a certain circadian rhythm. That is, your body's hormones go up and down through the day. So just before you wake up, around 5 a.m., your body actually has this spike of certain hormones like growth hormone and cortisol and so on. And that basically takes the calories and starts pumping out into your system. So it raises your blood glucose. So you don't need to eat because your body's already gotten yourself ready for the day. If you're hungry, then sure, you can go eat if you want to, but you don't have to. You don't have to force yourself. There's nothing healthy about stuffing a muffin in your mouth at 8 a.m., right? If you don't want to, then just don't, right? If it means that you get way too hungry and you're tempted and you're eating, candy bars at 10:30, sure, eat an egg or something in the morning, right? But there's nothing intrinsically healthy about putting something in your mouth in the beginning of the day. Your body's already gotten yourself ready for it. I mean, the truth is our body knows what to do if we don't eat. Like, that just takes stuff out of storage. So eating breakfast, I mean, I don't eat breakfast. I haven't eaten breakfast regularly for years. And that wasn't originally because I thought it was healthy or unhealthy. It was just because, like you, I really just didn't feel the need to, and for a long time after, like during residency and stuff, I was just too tired. I was just I prefer to sleep, right? So then I just rolled out of bed, went to work. I just didn't eat anything, and that was fine. And after a while, I just got in the habit. So I haven't done that for years, and really, I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. I mean, the whole idea that there's something magical about breakfast. There's nothing magical. It's a meal like any other meal. if you eat a good meal, that's good. If you don't eat a good meal, well, you can just hold off on it. So that's some of the thinking. Like, it's really interesting because if you look at all those studies of breakfast, how you get all these people telling you have to, and really most of the ones that have showed a strong effect were actually sponsored by the breakfast companies, right? So, Kellogg's and all that, which is basically, tells you why that result was so positive. Essentially, it's like saying, well, the studies made by Kellogg's tell you must eat breakfast. Well, yeah. That's not science. That's just, some company trying to make a study for marketing purposes, right? So that's what you have to understand about a lot of the studies that came out of that. And of course, it gets promoted as science, and therefore you have to eat. But really, it's to me just an option. If you want to, great. If you don't want to, that's okay too.
As you were developing your theories on this, which is really not the too distant past here. Sounds like you've been at it for a little over 10 years now. But you obviously are interacting with other doctors, you're interacting with other people in the medical community, you're interacting with patients. How much resistance to these ideas did you experience from people, that, also went to medical school and also have, they're also doctors? I mean, you mentioned the conference example with the food out everywhere. But my assumption is that you at least early on were running into people who were just adamant and trying to get you to stop. And I think the reason I'm asking is because, for the average person who's going to try to do this, they're going to run into people who are just adamant and really like take it upon themselves to try to make you stop. I mean, I have met a few people in my life, Dr. Fung, who like they're dedicated to derailing. I mean, they have taken it upon themselves to be right and to make me wrong. But my assumption is you've run into this in your own profession as well. I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about that, and if you think perceptions are actually changing now.
Yeah, I think you're right. So when I started, there's a massive amount of resistance. People really thought it was the most insane thing they'd ever heard about. But the advantage is that as a physician, I can talk to them and I can explain it to them. And I was, doing talks and, with the books and trying to get the message out there. And as soon as I started to listen to it, in fact, most of the doctors immediately saw the logic of what I was talking about because they understood it too. And as soon as I pointed out, like, where's these studies that say you shouldn't fast? Like, show them to me. Or, I'd say, well, what do you think happens? Why do you think we carry around a big amount of body fat? Like, just, to look good, like a peacock's feathers? It's not that. So they understood immediately the logic. And the other thing they understood, of course, was that I got this response quite a lot was, oh, I used to do that all the time during residency. Because you understand, during residency, we're busy, right? So you get slammed in the emergency room. All of a sudden, you're just not, you're going right through lunch. You're going right through dinner. We did this like all the time. You're in the operating room. You just went 20 hours straight sort of thing, right? You just didn't eat because there's just too much work to do. So all the doctors were like, I used to do this like for years, like for 5, 7, 8 years of my life. I was doing this 3, 4, 5 times a week, like whenever. And they understood immediately, having done it themselves and understanding the physiology, that there wasn't anything wrong with not eating. That's, our body's built that way. If we had to eat, 6 times a day, like we wouldn't have survived as a species. It's like you see those cavemen breaking out the granola bars. I don't think so. Right? They ate when there was food and there wasn't. So very quickly, the physicians saw the logic of what I was talking about. It just needed that sort of pointing out. The dietitians, of course, were much more resistant because they probably didn't have the same personal experience, and they also, were probably just listening to what the sort of teaching was down the line. So, in fact, a lot of physicians started to come around to the view that, hey, this is just a reasonable way to do things. Then the studies started to come in, and then a lot of people started using it in their practice and seeing a lot of the same success that I was doing. So now, of course, there's a lot less resistance to it. There still is some, probably from people who haven't sort of recognized that a lot of these dietary paradigms are changing, just like with fat, right? So for years, through the 80s and 90s, we're all taught that all fat is bad, right? So it took another 10 years before we talked about healthy fats. It took a long time. And then now, of course, we understand that, hey, avocados, olive oil, fatty fish, like they're actually quite good for you. But you have to remember that for about 2 decades, through the 80s and 90s, we were all about, no fat at all, zero fat. So the same thing I see is happening with the fasting. So a lot more acceptance. Now I'm giving lectures to the obesity medicine associations, a lot of people, and it's a lot more receptive to what I'm saying. So, that's encouraging. At least things are starting to change around.
So our story, Scott and I have been longtime friends, Dr. Fung. And so several years ago, we did keto together to begin with here. And that was really the first time. And what happened was I saw we had been out of touch, or you'd been traveling, Scott, and working other places for a while. I saw him, and in a short amount of time, he had just lost a good deal of weight. And I was like, "How did you do this?" And immediately that day, I began and I followed him. He's my beta tester. Basically, he does all these things, and then whatever works, then I follow him along. But that was the first time I ever really, as an adult, which is crazy, is how irresponsible I've been most of my adult life, of paying attention to cause and effect. Really, understanding even why I was eating what I was eating, and the sort of the emotional triggers of food versus nutritional reasons why you eat in the first place. So that was sort of like my transition into even being aware in the first place of those kind of things. And then, of course, I followed Scott and this thing. But my personal story is, so it worked both times, if you will. But in both of these situations, though, I have, like I said, I've relapsed, where I've had a situation where, and what happened for me, it was I went maybe for 4 or 5 months. It was working great. Then I went on a vacation with my family, and I fell right back into the patterns of regular eating, if you will, with them. And I had a really hard time then getting back on the horse. So you're a physician. Scott's a very methodical thinker. You're both disciplined people. What is your advice for undisciplined people? Because, you're presenting facts, and for a normal person who's sane, you would say, yes, I have a solution for you. It's up to you if you want to take it or not, right? And so, here I know what you're saying. I believe in what you're saying, but I don't necessarily follow it. So I'm asking you to be my therapist.
No, what you're saying is totally true. And I have a company, the fasting method, that actually works with people on this. And we actually talk about this all the time. So we say that there's actually 3 things in terms of weight loss. And most people think it's just about the knowledge, right? You know the right diet, and therefore you will be able to lose weight. No. That's actually probably the smallest part of it. So there's the knowledge, but the second thing is the environment and the triggers that we talk about. So trying to avoid environments that are going to make you unsuccessful, systems that are going to make you unsuccessful. Like if you systematize and say, I'm going to eat 3 meals and 3 snacks, well, your system's going to make you fail, right? But then the third thing is the emotions, because the emotions are actually hugely important, because you have to realize that we eat for a number of reasons. And probably nutrition and hunger are probably on the lower side of why we eat. What's very high up is the sort of reward factor of food. You eat food because it's delicious, or you eat food because you're with people, or you eat food because of that. So there's a huge amount of emotional, there's a huge emotional factor to eating. So one of the things that is really important also is to have sort of a supportive community. And this is part of the emotional side of things. So, you say to yourself, okay, well, people have been fasting. So if you look at any religion, you say Ramadan, they have a fasting month. Catholics fast during Good Friday. Jewish people fast during Yom Kippur. Like, what's the secret? How does everybody do that year after year? Well, you have a supportive community. If you are fasting on, say, Good Friday, and everybody else is too, it's not fun, but it's not that hard because nobody else is doing it around you, right? And we call that in school as peer pressure because it's something you've got this pressure to conform. As adults, of course, you have more, autonomy. So it's actually a form of peer support. You find those people that are going to allow you to succeed, and that's where it's important to have your family on board and stuff, and people who will keep you accountable. So if you have somebody that you do it with, if your family knows that, hey, we had a great vacation, we went on a cruise, ate way too much, ate stuff that we know is not good for us, but we're going to make up for it. We're going to do a week of sort of, 24-hour fasting a couple times and do this. Well, put it on the schedule. Tell your friends or your family, this is what I'm doing, right? And then if they see you cheating, they're gonna be like, hey, what are you doing, right? It's like, and so that's a way to keep yourself accountable for things. So having that group is really, really important. It's a form of support. If you do anything by yourself, it's 10 times as hard.
No,
Exercising,
it's murder. It's murder to be alone. I mean, I think we've learned that in the last two years in this world. How many people have been alone, and the outcomes of being alone. And so this is like anything else, right? And having a group. That's why I think what you mentioned your company, the fasting method, which I've gotten into and to watch the videos and I listen to Megan's podcast. I mean, I sort of you guys have become my. I mean, you all are literally in the car with me all the time. Your voice and her voice, like they're constantly around because you all are my support system. But I think that's a key issue, because if you don't find somebody or some group, no matter what you're trying to do, it makes it murder to complete it and to be successful and to feel good about, and to reinforce that, yes, I am doing the right thing here.
Yeah, I mean, the last 2 years of this pandemic, I mean, if you look at the statistics on weight gain, it's horrendous. It's like, the average, I was just looking, I think, was like 30 plus pounds. It's an incredible amount. And interestingly, it's the millennials that are actually suffering the most, because I think they're sort of the most social group, the sort of baby boomers and stuff who are getting over 65 and stuff, because their sort of groups are a little smaller. Their social connections are probably more sort of just within the family and stuff. They actually did better in terms of weight gain. But that's the whole thing. If you normally gain pleasure by going out with friends and, going to watch a movie and doing this and doing that, and all of a sudden that's all taken away from you, well, then if the only thing that's left that's pleasurable is eating, you're going to eat. That's basically all that there's going to happen. And unfortunately, that's really what's happened. So there's a huge social component to an emotional component to weight gain that we have to understand and acknowledge in order to be successful. I mean, fasting is one part of it, but on the other hand, it is this connections and other stuff that we really need to do. So, that's where you really can, Joe, I mean, look at your sort of situation and say, how can I leverage this to my advantage, right? And sometimes talking to a friend, can help you, and, getting a coach can help you, and this kind of thing, right? And say, well, can you do this? Like, can you say, okay, I'm going to put this on the schedule. So, for example, I do podcasts, for example, and a lot of times I'll stick them at noontime. Why? Because one, I get extra time. Two, if I'm fasting, it just takes my mind off of it, and then it's done. Right. So put it on the schedule.
That's perfect. And I will say that during the work week, typically Scott and I are both busy enough that that's not a problem. Working through lunch, if you will, is fine. It's just a matter of understanding I don't have to make up for it later. because there's the emotional thing
Exactly.
about the reward again to say, well, I missed lunch, so I'm going to go ahead and eat this other thing now. The other thing, frankly, is that food is, and I think you're exactly right about being emotion, because it's also it's a boredom trigger for me. It's a situation. If I'm watching television, if I'm watching a sporting event, there's this common thing about wanting just once I literally almost have like this. I don't know what you call it. What the physical response is. Like my hand
It's a
reaches
conditioned
out
response. Yeah.
exactly to eat something. So it's a matter of reconditioning. Now Scott is a fantastic friend and someone who has been an ally. It's a matter of me listening and encouraging him. And Scott, you've heard me say to you, please keep me honest.
Yeah,
Don't be shy about doing that.
Well, I think our checking in on each other has been vital for me, because it also, when I'm trying to hold you accountable, I'm also trying to hold myself accountable, because I also have triggers. I mean, at night, stress and anxiety. I mean, I think in the modern world, you have, the average person is, especially the average parent, stress and anxiety. And for me, those are the nighttime triggers. And so often when I'm feeling those, I want to talk to somebody about it and not give into it. But it doesn't always work. I mean, the truth is, you're going to have moments where you fail because of what's going on in your life. Our guest on the Flyover Country podcast this week is Dr. Jason Fung, who is a noted author, the international guru of the intermittent fasting phenomenon that's sweeping, I would say, the world right now. I mean, you're getting a lot of publicity about fasting, even as there are people who try to derail us all. People are recognizing that this works. I wanted to ask you about the industry of dieting, because I think one of the things that really spoke to me in your writing is just about how, there's this whole industry that's committed to getting you to do things, but it's not necessarily committed to your success. It's just committed to their success. And there's a lot of gimmicks. I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, there's a lot of gimmicky stuff out there. When Joe and I were doing, keto, Atkins, basically, you wind up in this, you can go down a deep rabbit hole of trying to buy all the branded foods, and they sort of trick you into thinking, well, if you just eat more of these things that has our label on it, it will be even better than it was last week when you didn't have these things. I'm trying, what I was wondering about is, because you're not really selling necessarily, or you're not really preaching. In some ways you do, but not what to eat. And you're not trying to sell Dr. Fung, granola bars. You're talking about when to eat, what happens inside your body when you do eat, which is a different thing, in my opinion, than the average diet industry person. How do you keep your methods in your mind? Like, how are you keeping that separate from being lumped in with, every other gimmick that we've seen come along in the last several years that doesn't work?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I mean, this happens to all diet trends, I think, is that it gets going, like keto, for example. And if you look at the keto movement, it was originally one of the sort of important things was to eat real food. So they're talking about eating, fats, natural fats, and, meats and so on. Of course, you get all the people who just see the high fat part of things and then want to make a keto bar or keto shake or whatever, right? Which is completely opposite of what it was. And the funniest one, I think, was the paleo movement. If you remember paleo, eat like your caveman ancestors, which is all natural foods, right? And I think that's it's a great diet. Then you got the paleo bars, and it's like cavemen didn't have bars. They didn't have 7 paleo milkshake. Right? Yeah, cavemen didn't eat milkshakes. Yeah. So the whole thing, when it starts out as this great movement where it's like eat natural food, gets completely derailed, not by the original people, because the original people they're basically aghast at this whole sort of thing. But it gets derailed because the big things, commercial interests, wind up taking over all of it. So I try to sort of stick to what I'm saying, which is just fasting. It's hard to sort of monetize it, if you will, with products. I mean, there are people who try to come up with fasting things, but it's difficult, right? So there's not a lot because you're really just not eating. And like there's things like tea. So I did work with a company to make some fasting teas, which were just specially blended green teas and so on. But I don't really promote that much. I mean, if you want to drink tea, just drink tea, right? It's been around for thousands of years. There's thousands of different brands and stuff. That's really the only thing is, to try and stay true to your message, which is, what I'm trying to talk about is not simply the diet, because the diet is what you're eating. And, that's important, but it's not the only thing. It's only half the story. So if you only pay attention to diet, you're missing half the story, because it's about what you eat, but it's also about sort of when you eat or how often you eat. Same with anything. Like if you make $100, it's like, that's great. If you made $100 once a year, well, it's not a lot of money, right? So it's how often, right? So if you eat, a meal, that could be good. But if you eat that meal 8 times a day, that's not good at all, right? So it's not just about what you're eating. It's about how often you're eating it, when you're eating it. So that's the part that nobody really had paid attention to. Like, should we be eating constantly? Because that's what we do now. And the answer is no. Remember, your body sort of only exists either in a fasted state where you're burning calories or a fed state where you're storing calories. And you can't store calories and burn calories at the same time. Your body doesn't want to do this, one or the other. So give your body more time. And I think to some extent, it's been really hard for people to really make it too commercial, just because of the nature of fasting. It doesn't lend itself to a lot of sort of products, that you can sell. So that's why you don't see a lot of it. There is one though, it's called the fasting mimicking diet, which is actually an interesting product, just because they do a lot of science. So they actually do a lot of studies showing that it's actually improvement. And I think it's essentially just a very sort of low calorie sort of thing. But they to their credit, they actually are doing the studies to show that some of that can be very beneficial. But that's sort of how I sort of do it. I try and stick to what I'm preaching, which is, let's think about these things. The fasting is just because there's nothing there to sell. It's not like you can say, oh, this is a fasting shake. It's like, yeah, that's just water.
So I have a question about this fasting industry, and I'm going to call it an industry because, as Joe knows, whenever I start to follow something, I really dig deep. And so after learning about you, I then naturally started looking for everything else. And so you run across all these other personalities: Dave Asprey, Jen Stevens. There's people with podcasts. There's people with websites. I mean, there's a ton of people out there who are preaching some form of intermittent fasting. And some of it looks a lot like what you're talking about, and some of it's different. And, I'm curious about, but I think everybody sort of recognizes you're the granddaddy of this, though. I've been personal because I consume all this information. I've even found these carnivore people. Like, there are people out there who are telling you fast and only eat meat, like literally don't eat anything but meat. I'm interested in how you interact with this community, because you sort of sit atop this regime, I think, of information, and now all these other people are coming along. How do you interact with them, and what is your commentary about the growth of people who are talking about your theories, but maybe putting their own spin on it?
I think it's fine. I mean, I know a lot of these people, and really there's no one right or wrong way to do it. I mean, if you're getting good results, then it's right for you. And whether it works for somebody else, it doesn't matter. If it works for you, it's totally fine. So there's sort of infinite variations of fasting. So if you do a classic water fast, water only fast, that's the classic way to do it. But you can actually get great benefits from adding in certain things. So if you add in, say, coffees and teas, that's not a classic fast, but it makes it easier. So if it makes it easier, you're more likely to do it. There are people who do it like there's the 5-2, which is Dr. Michael Mosley, where you do 2 days of sort of 500 calories. And that works for some people, and other people who use bone broth. And so all these variations can still work extremely well. So there's no one right or wrong way of doing it. So if Dave Asprey wants to put a spin on it, hey, I'm sure it'll work for a lot of people. If it doesn't, then you can always tighten it up. You can say, okay, well, this coffee with a lot of butter in it, this is probably slowing down my success. Let me get rid of that, and I'll just go to sort of green tea sort of thing. So there's different ways, but some people will say, well, that was the secret to success, right? So I don't like, I think they all have sort of value to add to this sort of discussion, as long as you understand the sort of principles of the whole thing, which is that essentially what you're trying to do is get your body to use up those its own calories, right? So all of those, I think they're all valuable. They bring a different perspective. I try and talk about the principles so that you sort of understand sort of this is what's happening in the body, and therefore then you can see that, hey, this might work, and this might work, and this might work. Carnivore is just a different spin on keto, for example. It's to me it's interestingly enough, on the carnivore side, I've had a few patients do it, and I always thought, well, this is not going to go too well, but surprisingly, they actually did very well. So it's like, to me, I was like, hey, I'm not here to judge you. If you're doing great, then why would I want you to change, right? They did very well on it. Now, they couldn't sustain it. So then I said, that's fine. Then go back to something that's more sustainable to you. But all of these, I think, have their place, and that's why I'm sort of okay with all of these things. And I think a lot of them have sort of taken it and taken it in a little bit different directions. But as long as you understand the sort of underlying principle, which is don't eat all the time, then it's okay.
For me, Scott, what you did for me, and first it was through keto, and now it's through intermittent fasting, is just being aware in the first place that I never gave it any thought to basically sugar and understanding carbohydrates, understanding sugar, and the fact that I was 50 years old, Dr. Fung, and up to that point had never really quite, for lack of better words, digested, if you will, that information, or maybe I was just intentionally ignoring it. But in other words, just being aware, like, oh, that's why my body craves that. And just that awareness going in now, the fact that I am more of a conscious eater now in the first place is like my first victory. That's Scott's biggest victory for me, is the fact that he's made me aware rather than just unconsciously putting things into my body.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I always thought was very strange, was that people with type 2 diabetes, for example. So if you understand about carbohydrates are sugars. That's what they are. Proteins are different. They're amino acids, and fats are fats, right? So if you have a disease where your sugars are too high, then why would you want to eat lots of carbohydrates? Because and I know, and everybody knows, that's going to spike your sugar. Like, you eat a slice of bread, low-fat bread, your sugar's going to spike up. Well, if your sugars are high, why would you eat that slice of bread? And yet dietitians and doctors were busy telling people to eat 50, 60, 70% carbohydrate diets, and to avoid the fats, and not eat too much meat. It's like, well, wouldn't you want to eat proteins and fats, get your energy from proteins and fats, and not carbohydrates, which is glucose, right? So again, having a little bit of that sort of understanding, then you say, yeah, now I understand why this is going to work. The keto might work if you're trying to lose weight, or if you're type 2 diabetic, or so on. But yeah, so understanding that is certainly important. And I think that's where all of these people bringing their sort of different perspectives is sort of valuable, to have that discussion.
Dr. Jason Fung is our guest on the Flower Country podcast this week. Dr. Fung, you have been a terrific guest, I think, and we're going to do one more thing, which we do with all of our guests, which is the famous lightning round. We don't give you the questions in advance, but we do expect you to answer them. But before we do, I just wanted to say that I'm really grateful for your coming on. I'm grateful for the book you wrote. I'm grateful for the work you've done. I'm grateful for the resistance that you've overcome. I still have a long way to go in my own, journey, but I can honestly say there aren't too many people that you get a chance to meet that have truly impacted your life in some way. I can say that about you, and I'm hoping that the people who listen to this podcast run out and buy your book and listen to your videos and subscribe to your methods, because just take it from someone who did it. it works and it's not complicated. And, I tell people it's the simplest, it's the only plan I've ever had in my life to solve any problem where the plan was to do nothing and literally do nothing. It's all you have to do is do nothing. It's as simple. And I think in our culture, people like complex problems require complex solutions. We have to come up with charts and you really don't. A complex problem like solving your own health issues in this particular case really does have a simple solution. So with that having been said, let's do our famous lightning round. Number one, you are at your office and either the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of Canada calls you up and says, I need you to stop doing what you're doing and I need you to come be the Surgeon General or whatever the equivalent of that is in Canada because you got to fix this. Would you do it?
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to do it. I mean, it's one of these things that has so many implications for so many people. Like so many people are suffering with this problem and we don't need money to do it. It's not like we need specialized equipment or anything. We just need to make it easier for people. Like if you tell people to do stuff, they will. Like we told people to stop smoking and they did. It took them a while, but we did. And we told people to watch their blood pressures and get it checked and they did. And we told people to, get colon cancer screening and stuff. So, and they did. So because they want to be healthy, right? So it's just about giving them the right information about, hey, here's this great intervention that you can do. We'll help you do it. We'll make it normal for people to do. And then you'll be able to do something about it. If your sugars start to go up, it's not a life sentence of type 2 diabetes. You can do something about this. And we'll help
now that you've accepted the nomination, Scott's going to be the person, the political strategist to get you into that position.
Yeah, I feel like we need to take this on as a campaign. Dr. Fung, Surgeon General. I'm for it. I mean, I know you're not from here, but
Dr. Fung,
but believe me,
lightning round question. When you break a fast, what's the first thing you eat?
I try to eat as normally as I would. So if I'm planning to eat whatever it is I'm planning to eat, then whether I eat breakfast and lunch I usually don't eat breakfast, but whether I eat lunch that day or not, it's going to be the same because the point is for that lunch or meal that you miss to take the calories from your body fat stores or your body sugar so that your sugar goes down. Then therefore, you should just stick to it, the dinner just as you normally would. Or if you skip the whole day, then the next day, again, you eat as you normally would. Like once you finish your fast, you forget about it. It's done. It's over. Your body's taken it from your calories of body fat. The next meal is exactly as it would have been had you eaten or not eaten. And that's the way I sort of look at it. And that's the way sort of, getting back to emotional side, this visualization, like what I'm trying to get people to visualize is that, hey, you didn't deprive yourself or anything. What you did was you let your body eat that meal from your body fat. So the next meal is the exact same, whether you've eaten or not. And that's the sort of visualization that is sort of useful sometimes for people.
All right, next question. What is if you ran into somebody on the sidewalk today and they said, I know who you are, just give me 10 seconds. What do you recommend my schedule be tomorrow? Is it 16:8? Is it 18:6? Is it 24? Like if you had 30 seconds with somebody on the sidewalk, what would be the go-to advice on it? What do you do tomorrow?
I usually tell people to start with cutting snacks. So, trying to go breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then, nothing after dinner till breakfast the next day, which is, somewhere between 12 and 14 hours to start with. And then the next day, just to push that up to 16 hours. In the past, people got into trouble. And so there's all these studies in the 60s that they did. They got into trouble because when they did fasting studies, they really meant fasting. They were going 30, 60, 90 days at a time. And that's a lot to go from nothing to 60 days sort of thing. So now we don't do that, of course. So you want to take it gradually, especially with me. I'm working mostly with older people who have other health conditions. So you want to take it gradually. So 16 hours is a great way to start until you're comfortable with that. And then you can push it up if necessary and if you feel comfortable with it.
Lightning round question. Who is the most famous person on your cell phone?
I don't know who the most famous person is, actually. That's a good question.
Well, I was going to spin it and ask, who's the most famous person that has called you and said, okay, I saw you on TV. I'm such and such. You need to tell me what to do here because I'm struggling.
Uh, Again, I'm not sure. I've interacted with Nassim Taleb, who's a writer.
Yeah.
He's in a different field from me. Obviously, I've spoken to a lot of people in the sort of medical field and dieting field and so on, but he writes about, financial probability and all this sort of thing. A guy who I think he's one of the smartest guys. And I interacted with him a few times because he was also into sort of thought fasting was a really interesting thing. And that was to me very cool because I always thought that our world sort of intersected in a way that was completely unexpected considering how different what we write about is.
All right. Last question for me, and then I'll give you one final one. Dr. Fung, one food that you wish was healthy, but isn't, but you wish it was so that you could eat it without reservation.
There's so many foods like that, but luckily the one food that I love and probably most people love, avocados. And luckily it is healthy, right? It's just
for you, yeah.
I could eat that all day. I mean, it's like they're great. Like they're full of healthy fats. There's lots of fiber. And the other thing that I do tend to eat a lot of, which again, luckily, and most people think it's one of these things, but it's like bacon, or pork belly. I just love that. And luckily, again, it's not that bad. And, not many carbs, lots of sort of fat and protein, and it's just great. I mean, but honestly, who doesn't love bacon and avocado? Luckily, I can eat it.
Yeah, I think you may be failing to see the political implications of what you just said. Because if I were a politician and I were promising to appoint a top public health official who was going to order us all to eat bacon, then you don't need. I mean, the amount of votes that are available to this person. I mean, there's no limit. There's no limit to what a politician could do if they would only follow your political advice on eating bacon. Joe, last one.
Well, I think Dr. Fung is probably maybe the first Canadian to be on the podcast, Scott. So when we plan our next vacation, what's the first place we should come to in Canada?
There's a lot of nice places. I mean, I'm from Toronto, so obviously I'm biased, but I think, Toronto is a great city, but also we have great cities. On the West Coast, there's Vancouver, which is beautiful. And on the East Coast, if I had to pick one, obviously I'm so used to Toronto, but the East Coast of Canada, Nova Scotia and so on, just beautiful. Like in the summertime, it gets a little cold there in the wintertime, but the ocean, they have great scenery, great people, great food, so Nova Scotia, that area is just great.
Okay, we'll meet you there. We'll do some private counseling. We'll see what your rates are there. Thanks for thanks for letting me lean in here and getting some advice. I appreciate it.
Dr. Jason Fung, you've been a great guest on the Flower Country podcast, and we sincerely appreciate your time today. We know you're busy. We know you're in high demand, and I will just say again, I think everything you've said and everything you've written, if people really took it seriously, they would see the same kind of life changes that I've seen, and we couldn't recommend it more. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Really couldn't be happier with our interview with Dr. Fung today. And I just wanted to, here at the close of the show, come back and say, all you really have to do is listen to this person and read what they have to say. Go to Amazon. He's an author. He's written The Obesity Code, The Complete Guide to Fasting, The Diabetes Code, The Cancer Code, The PCOS Plan. The way he approaches his writing is extremely accessible. So if you're like me, and before you sort of do big things, you want to research it deeply, and you want to know, well, why am I doing this? What are the methods behind this? He's written the kinds of books that underpin big change, but they do it in a way that's not too dense for people like me. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor, but he makes it really accessible and understandable. So go to Amazon, buy this guy's book, listen to him on a few podcasts. We had a great conversation today. Look at some of his videos. And just understand what I have come to believe about Dr. Fung is that he approaches all of this with an open heart, and that he wants people to just know what he knows so they can improve their own health outcome. We even talked about, how, his methods are different than the people who are out there trying to monetize, diet gimmicks, which is, what people do. it's not really what he's doing. And I'm so impressed by him. So anyway, I wanted to just plug his website, drjasonfung.com, thefastingmethod.com, and go to Amazon and look at his books. And thanks for being with us on Flyover Country. I'm Scott Jennings. Flyover Country with Scott Jennings is a production of Bluegrass Media Lab, coming to you from the heart of Middle America, Louisville, Kentucky. If you like what you heard, subscribe to Flyover Country on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. 5-star reviews will help us keep making the content that you love. To find my latest television hits, columns, and other commentary, go to scottjenningsky.com. And you can also find me at scottjenningsky on Twitter and Facebook. Thanks for listening, and talk to you soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, make sure your seat backs and folding trays are in their full upright position. Cabin crew, please take your seats for landing, and thank you for choosing Flyover Country with Scott Jennings.